What would you do for family? This is likely a question you've had to ask yourself at some point, and I've learned for kinship caregivers, the answer can completely change their life overnight. I saw the impact this question can have within my own family when my grandparents became kinship caregivers. A kinship caregiver is a relative who's not the birth parent of a child that takes on a primary caregiving role because the child's birth parents are unable to or need assistance in caring for them. This can be a grandparent like within my own family, or aunts and uncles, cousins, siblings, even family friends. My grandparents began caring for their grandson, my cousin, full-time when he was 5. I really experienced what kinship care meant to its core in the last conversation I had with my grandma. Unfortunately, 8 years into caring for my cousin, she was dying of cancer, and I couldn't be home to be with her in person. So I called her on the phone, knowing this might be the last time we would talk. And really, the conversation didn't go as I expected it to. I thought we would share fond memories and last wishes, and although this came up, there is a different focus. That was making sure my cousin was taken care of. One of the last things she said to me on the phone was, "Make sure you order your cousin's school uniforms on time. Promise me." These seemingly mundane words are never meant to be last words said between heavy breaths, but the words of a younger parent. In that moment, it was clear what mattered most to my grandma, her caregiving role. She passed that on to my parents and my family, and I now consider my cousin my brother. Since this last conversation, there has been an echoing whisper in my ear, if not me, then who? No one else I knew was talking about families that looked like mine, so I decided to learn more about it and joined a research lab. I learned kinship families face many complex issues, but also a great lack of support. From here, I made it my mission to create platforms where kinship caregivers feel heard and supported, and to amplify their voices and experiences. At the height of a pandemic, I started an online support group for kinship caregivers in Ohio. We've laughed together, we've cried together, we've celebrated together, we've really formed a community. Over the past 3 years, I've heard story upon story upon story from kinship caregivers. When others ask me what I do and I explain the term kinship care, I often get the response, "I've never heard that word before, but I know someone in that situation." And perhaps that's the same for you too. You see, although kinship care isn't often talked about, it's a common phenomenon across cultures and throughout history. Currently in the United States, 8 million children are being raised by relatives as their primary caregiver. Of this number, 2.5 million children are being raised by relatives without their birth parents in the household. Kinship care has been on the rise throughout the country, and especially in Ohio with the opioid epidemic. So, what are the reasons for kinship care? I just mentioned one of them. The child's birth parents may struggle with substance use disorder and mental health challenges that make it difficult to care for a child. Additionally, they may struggle with financial or housing instability, poor physical health, domestic violence, or even death. A lot of these factors can occur at the same time. It's important to note that most children in kinship care have experienced some form of trauma, such as neglect, prior to living with relatives. So now you may be thinking, isn't kinship care the same as foster care? And the answer is complex, but largely no. Kinship care and non-relative foster care are distinctly different, and in fact, a majority of kinship families are not part of the foster system. Although some may want to become licensed for the supports, there are many systemic barriers to doing so, and others are never given the option in the first place. Historically, kinship caregivers have been intentionally excluded from becoming a part of the foster system because, quite honestly, it's seen as them saving funding and that kinship caregivers don't need the supports. And also, many families don't want to be part of the system and fear being part of a system called broken with a long history of racism. For these reasons and others, only 5% of kinship caregivers are licensed as foster families. And really, the journey between kinship care and non-relative foster care looks quite different. We'll start at the beginning. Welcoming a child into your home is a huge life transition for anyone. For foster parents, it's something they're largely planning to do in this phase of their life, and they go through months of training prior to caring for a child. However, kinship families are largely born out of a time of crisis. They might only have a week, a day, an hour to decide if they'll take a child into their care and turn their life around completely. It's not a planned life event. And caregivers share that even though it is a choice, it doesn't really feel like one given the alternative. And the journey of caring for a child, the supports look different too. Foster parents receive a guaranteed monthly stipend meant to cover the cost of caring for a child, as well as respite care and case management services. However, kinship families are largely left to rely on public benefits that cover little to none of the costs of caring for a child and coordinate care on their own. This is even more devastating considering kinship caregivers are more likely to come from intersectional backgrounds that face societal injustices. They're more likely to be single, Black, female, and low income. But we know the outcomes are different for kids too. Kids do better in kinship care. If you think about it for yourself, if you were in a scary or uncertain situation, would you rather be with a family member or a stranger? Even the system recognizes that kids have better well-being and placement stability in kinship care, as there's a federal law stating that workers must first seek out relatives before placing a child into foster care. The irony here is, although kinship care is better for kids, there is such a great lack of awareness and support. It's estimated that caregivers save the child welfare system $4 billion per year. Yet, this is probably the first time you've heard the word kinship. I've heard from caregivers, even if they have a seat at the table, they feel invisible, like no one sees or understands their role. Some of this may come from the bias that it's family, they ought to do it without help, or even family matters should stay in the family. But I want to challenge these viewpoints and invite you all into the perspective of a caregiver with the question, what wouldn't you do for a child who would otherwise enter foster care? So let's say it's any old day, you get a phone call, the person on the other end of the line says, you need to get here right away, there's been a family emergency and there's kids involved. You drop what you're doing, drive there as fast as you can, knowing your grandchildren are there, your nieces and nephews are there, or your siblings. When you get there, you're met by a police officer or a caseworker, and they say to you, the children have experienced neglect, seems like the parents are struggling with substance use disorder or mental health challenges, or there's been a domestic violence dispute. No matter the cause, the worker says to you, you either need to take these kids into your care now or they're going to enter the foster system. In that moment, you know what you have to do. You pack the kids into the car, everything you can into a laundry basket, and start driving home. This is day one. And although you can't see the road ahead, you know you're doing what's best. But really, your life gets turned upside down completely overnight. You now have 1, 2, 3 new children in their home. You're rearranging furniture and buying new beds. If you're caring for infants or toddlers, you're back on diaper duty and bottle feedings and that whole fun schedule. If you're caring for older kids, you're working to enroll them into school and extracurriculars. You're getting everyone into therapy and doctor's appointments. You find your schedule quite busy. And also, you have to learn to parent again and parent differently, knowing these children have experienced trauma and they're showing different behaviors. You can't be the fun relative who spoils the kids and gives them back at the end of the day. Now 24/7, it's your job to make sure these children's needs are met. Financially, you didn't plan for these kids. If you're working and planning to retire, you have to keep working and take out of your retirement or add on a second job. And if you don't make enough to cover childcare, you might have to quit your job completely and stay at home with the kids. This also takes a toll on your relationships. If you're married or in a long-term partnership, you don't have that quality time with your partner like you used to. And you notice that your friends start to fade in the background too. A lot of them can't understand the situation you're in. And quite honestly, you don't have the time or energy to socialize with them either. Your family dynamics also change. Some family members support you, others don't. You really want to support the child's birth parent who's struggling, but ultimately you feel like you have to put the children first. And it's heartbreaking having to bring the child's birth parent, your own relative, to court and testify against them for custody. All of this is a long, expensive, and draining process. It starts to take a toll on your physical health and your mental health. You start to feel isolated, alone, and even ashamed of the situation. You don't know where to turn for support. Phew, that was a lot for me to talk about. I'm sure it was a lot for you to think about. But imagine as a caregiver, this is your day-to-day reality. However, the good news is I only told one side of the story. Although kinship families face many challenges, there's so much more healing, strength, and joy to be found. Kinship care keeps kids in their families, which means they're more likely to stay connected to their family culture and heritage and traditions. They're likely in an environment that's familiar and feels safe to heal from trauma. They can stay connected to their birth parents and siblings and extended family. With the right supports, kinship care can be a healing journey for everyone involved. And what better way to show the strengths of family than through a Disney movie? I know what you're thinking. Most Disney characters have very dysfunctional families, but there is one movie in particular that really shows the healing nature of kinship care, and that is Lilo and Stitch. If you haven't seen the movie, you should definitely go watch it, but I'll sum it up for you. Nani begins caring for her younger sister Lilo and then also Stitch after their parents tragically die in a car accident. She goes through a lot of the changes we just talked about, going from an older sister to a parent role, not being trusted by the social worker in her abilities to care for Lilo, losing her friendships and relationships, and being fired from her job because she can't afford childcare. But through the challenges, they're able to stick together and overcome them against the odds, knowing they have one another. Their love and commitment to each other is iconically summed up by the family mantra we all know and love. Ohana means family. Family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. From the kinship families I've talked to, they hold so tight to this belief that family means no one gets left behind. This is their why. And perhaps this is a greater call to us all, a call to walk beside and show our support to kinship families who often do it alone, unseen and unsupported. So no matter what it looks like or who's in it, no family gets left behind or forgotten. Thank you.